Sodales. So let's talk about virtual assessment. And today we're still bending that beam of observation back. But we're not just looking at ourselves, we're looking at ourselves and the whole situation, the work that we do with our students, the context that we work in. That's actually a little harder than just assessing somebody else. And it's even harder than assessing ourselves, right? It's kind of a different layer of what we're doing. And it probably feels a little bit like this. As soon as I saw this picture in my Creative Commons search that I do, looking for just the right image that will, well, no, looking for a really good image that will make everything seem to fit together, I knew what we needed to talk about today. It's a scatter plot with just a whole bunch of data. The title is Scatter Plot, and the photographer's name is Brad Hawk. And I looked at it and I thought, how do you possibly go about making sense when there's too much information? Because that's how all of us are feeling right now, right? There's too much information, too much change, too many new things going on that we have to pay attention to. Because most of the decisions that we make as teachers in normal times, I mean, yeah, there's still a lot of information coming in, but most of that is routine, right? I mean, we know how the school operates. We know more or less where we're going. We know the general flow. That's why we get upset when things happen that take us out of the typical flow. Well, all of a sudden, that typical flow is gone. Everything is information. All of it might be important. How do we go about making sense of it? Well, I thought, when I was in third or fourth grade, my science textbook told me, and it had a brown cover, and it said, this is what you do. It said, this is the scientific method. This is what scientists do to make sense out of information when there's too much of it. And then, I took some social science classes. I took psychology and economics and the courses that you take to become a teacher. And I realized, oh, okay, social scientists do this too. We all theoretically do this, theoretically. Supposedly, we make an observation, right? I mean, you had that third grade science book text too, right? And we ask a question based on that observation, and maybe we do some research. We form a tentative hypothesis. We use that hypothesis to make a prediction, and then we test the prediction to see if it works. And that's what the book says. Except that when I did my Google search for steps of the scientific method, I discovered that there is a 5-step set, a 6-step set, a 7-step set, and a 10-step set. And then there are people that argue that that's not, in fact, what people do at all. So even science textbooks and science teachers don't agree on the process that we use to make sense out of what we see. But I think there is a thing that we do. There is a thing that we do, whether it's a scientific approach or not. There's kind of a human thing that we all do. One time my Aunt Helen looked at me and she said, honey, she said, you know that don't make no sense. And I looked at her and I thought, yeah, I actually do know that. I don't remember what I had told her, but I was like 8. And I probably said something that really didn't make any sense. But it wasn't just that it didn't make any sense. It was that she said, you know it doesn't. So what do we do when it doesn't make any sense? When the predictions that we've made are spectacularly wrong. According to the science textbook, we refine our hypothesis or make a new one. Maybe we sometimes do that. Most of the time, for me, it's more like, but I like my hypothesis. I want it to be true. I don't care about this other thing that's showing me it's not true. I want it to be true. What about you? Have you ever fallen in like or love with your hypothesis? So much so that you wanted to hang on to it, even though it wasn't making accurate predictions, even though there was a whole bunch of what they call this confirming data out there. Well, all of us have stories, right, that we tell ourselves. I think that the story that I told about my Aunt Helen is true. I remember it, but I remember lots of things. And if somebody else had been there, they might have said, no, she didn't say that. Anyway, we have stories we tell ourselves. We have labels that we make because that's how we make sense out of things. We make categories, right? And we kind of use those as lenses with which we view the world. And that works pretty well a lot of the time. When those things do work, it's great, right? Because then there's not overwhelming complexity. There's not the chaos that the Kneffen model talks about when everything is suddenly new. So when they do work, those things are great. When they don't work, it's kind of a problem, right? And some of us were in a situation even before COVID started where we were finding that some of our stories and labels and lenses weren't working as well as we wanted them to. But usually we kind of go along and try to make that be okay. But then what happens when they stop working? The old familiar story, the old familiar label, the old familiar lens that we used to view the world is just not working anymore. Maybe it feels like they've all collapsed and we're trapped in the wreckage. What do we do then? What do we do when our stories and labels and lenses collapse on us? I also found this picture this morning, and I thought this was one of the greatest pictures that I'd ever seen. And I was so happy that Cogdogblog had licensed it for use, because that is the question. What do we do when it just isn't working anymore and it seems like it's collapsing on us? Well, you probably feel some combination of frustration, anger, bitterness, and disappointment, right? But one of those things will probably be stronger. I mean, all of us feel all of those things when we've tried something and it just isn't working. But one of them is going to stick out more so. One of them happens like an instant before the other, or it's stronger than the other, or it's the one that we don't want to admit that we're feeling. My mom used to say she was just so very disappointed. And for a long time, I thought that meant she was mad. But she wasn't. She was just genuinely disappointed. And it's very different because I get frustrated. Well, angry sometimes, but mostly I just get frustrated. And I've known people who get angry, and I've known a lot of people who get bitter. They were why I was told as a very young teacher to avoid the teacher's lounge during my prep period, because that was where the bitter people hung out. Anyway, there's different solutions for different situations. That's the thing about it. And what's right for me may not be right for you. But the good news is we can find the right solution for you. You may need to just sit down and do that work yourself. You may need some help. If you do, please let me know. You may say, no, what I need to do is I need to get a group of people together and we need to fix this together. That's great. Go do that. Because it doesn't have to be as difficult and as complicated and as hard as it seems right now. We don't have to do that work alone. But when we're faced with a situation where our stories and our labels and our lenses have collapsed under the weight of all the information that just doesn't fit with them anymore, the only thing we can't do is sit there in the wreckage and pretend it's all going to be okay. I mean, you could do that, but it's not going to work, right? At some point, you got to leave the wreckage of those collapsed things behind. You got to look at the situation that's actually there, and then you have to ask yourself the scary question, now what? So when you're ready, if you need some help with that, you just let me know. And until then, while letting Sodales.